Alright, so we could both agree that The Boys in the Boat was a really interesting book, and that the character Joe Rance had a really interesting character arc throughout the entire course of the book, from being a closed person to an open person. So in his early life, Joe was he had a lot of difficulties, as in his father abandoning him, the loss of his mother, and that's really affected his childhood and how he developed in life. One quote says, he went back upstairs and told his son he would have to move out of the house. Joe was 10 years old. At 10 years old, he was kicked out of his own house. That's crazy. How does somebody deal with that? And with this, he kind of develops with these issues that even his own father abandoned him.
Yeah, I can agree with that because for the rowing techniques, you have to have trust with all your team members, and Joe's at that point not a very trustful person because it seems like everybody's abandoning him in his life, his mother dying and then his father kicking him out of the house. So he needs to learn throughout the book to trust his team members so he can better.
Exactly. It's all in the technique that you have to trust your team. You have to trust your teammates. You have to trust yourself, and you just have to work in unison. He isn't really familiar with that because he always grew up on his own.
As someone who's played on a couple teams before, I understand that it's very important to have a lot of communication. You have to really understand what your teammates are going through in order to have a good team experience, and this can help you win in your events that you're trying to produce. So for this is a very important thing for Joe and his team, and that he needs to continue improving on this as it goes along.
Exactly. The one word that he said is communication. The thing about Joe is he's always been closed, and especially after rowing, you could see some positive effects in his life. He goes on, and as soon as he starts trusting his teammates, you can see in his life how he begins to trust other people, and how he actually expresses his emotion to people, and is has a better character arc.
About Joe's emotion and how he's he's shy and he's really independent, and throughout the book we kind of learn how throughout rowing and how he works with his team, that he kind of opens up in a metaphorical way, and he learns how to cooperate physically and metaphorically, and that he opens up to people his girlfriend, his closest people.
Yeah, I agree with that because throughout the book, George Pocock was a big figure for him because he didn't really trust his teammates because he thought he was the weakest link and he didn't want to let them down. So he wanted to practice by himself. But over time, Pocock helped him open up and really trust his teammates just like how he should when they're actually playing in the Olympics.
Even towards the end of the book, the Olympics, Joe and his teammates, they were rowing in perfect unison and with little work and efficiently. This is a metaphor for the bonds that the teammates have trust, they made and trusted each other, and this is just throughout the entire book. He just opens up entirely, he lets go of his anger, and he just becomes a new person.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with what Liam said before about George Pocock, and how I think that he really sympathizes with Joe's anxieties coming from a poor family, and he became a mentor to him over time.
Another important topic that comes up throughout the whole book is weather. Weather plays a key factor in the book, as it's very unpredictable. You don't know day in and day out how the weather is going to be. One day it can be perfect and a wonderful day rowing. One day it can be completely horrible and it'll be a very difficult experience. We have some different quotes that can help prove our point through this a little better.
Yeah, especially during the tryouts for the rowing team, we have a quote saying, "Their aching muscles cramped up the moment they stopped moving them. They were dropped like flies." This means that during the tryouts, the weather was really bad, and they literally were just not able to keep up with the weather, and that it's just really difficult for them. And there's so many entries, and a lot of them got kicked off the teams because it was just really hard for them. And then it's kind of talking about how there's an internal struggle of people wanting to wanting a spot on the team.
Yeah, I can agree with that because even an external struggle is the weather was so harsh that their bodies couldn't keep up with it. So they need to learn better how to keep up with the weather so they can actually perform better.
Exactly like that. Like the weather basically almost exactly mimic the people who were trying out. Like after a while, like their bodies just gave out and like harsh conditions.
Like Tom was saying, as the weather struggles, they struggle. Eventually, the weather had some improvements, though it was generally pretty bad throughout the whole book. But there were some experiences where it was better than other days. So it kind of shows how the team, as they get more practice and more communication together, they can improve themselves.
Yeah, and that also there's a quote in one of the races that says, "And yet to their own and their coach's surprise, the worse the weather got, the better they began to row." And that shows how after they become a team, that no matter what the weather was, they were becoming like a team and becoming better rowers and doing better during the races.
This kind of shows how also the weather molded them. So they went from something that was bad and something that can hurt them to something that can really improve them. It's almost like Batman a little, where he was at first scared of bats and then he used that to influence himself into becoming a big superhero.
Yeah.
Metaphor.
Yeah, and back to what Claude was saying about the weather mimicking the characters' both internal and external struggles. Since the weather kept on being persistently bad, is sort of mimic the characters because they needed to overcome the weather so they can like take the obstacle of the weather. So when they go to the Olympics, they can perform like perfect unison no matter what the weather conditions are.
Exactly. Like it kind of showed their mentality in the moment because of the weather.
Another difficult factor of the weather was that Joe was not exactly in the best financial condition, so it was a little difficult. I have a quote that says, "It didn't help that he continued to feel like everyone's poor cousin. With the weather remaining cool, he still had to wear his ragged sweater to practice almost every day, and the boys still teased him continuously for it." So it shows how Joe was at first being treated a little differently because he was not as wealthy as everyone else, and he wasn't able to have the luxuries as many other people did. So it really kind of hurt his whole mentality in this, and it really could have hurt him as getting a spot on the team and having success with the team. But eventually he was able to overcome this, how similarly like the team overcame the weather, and then this led to their great successes.
Yeah, I agree with Nick because since the weather was cold and he had to wear his sweater, which was old and not as fancy as most people's, that sort of put him down, and the team always making fun of him. Like after that quote, there was a couple instances where they would make fun of him for always eating food, and that just showed that no matter what happened, he always felt down, but he had to get back up.
Yeah, and that's just even more examples of the internal struggle that Joe faced throughout the book.